and my other brother was more down with the funk. And so I would steal Earth, Wind & Fire, Ohio Players, and these kind of things from this brother, my older brother. So I'd collect all the records and go, and when he was gone, I would get in there and get the old Koss headphones on my head and just dig in the Queen. And
one of the world's biggest metal bands is about to lose their bass player over something as simple as wanting to play music with other people. Sounds crazy, right? But that's exactly what happened to Metallica in 2001, when Jason Newsted walked away from millions of dollars in global fame because his bandmates told him he couldn't pursue his own creative dreams. What you're about to hear is the real story behind one of rock music's most shocking breakups. It's a tale of friendship, betrayal, creative control, and wounded egos that nearly destroyed one of the greatest bands ever created. And at the center of it all was a little-known side project called Echobrain that would change everything forever. When Jason Newsted suddenly quit Metallica in January 2001, the official press release talked about personal reasons and physical damage from years of playing heavy music. But those were just carefully chosen words to hide a much more painful truth. Behind closed doors, there had been a bitter fight between Jason and his bandmates, especially drummer Lars Ulrich, over whether Jason should be allowed to make music outside of Metallica. To understand why this fight happened, we need to go back to the very beginning of Jason's time with the band. When Jason joined Metallica in 1986, he wasn't just becoming the new bass player. He was trying to fill the shoes of someone who could never be replaced. Cliff Burton had been more than just Metallica's bassist. He was the heart and soul of the band, a musical genius who brought classical influences and incredible creativity to their sound. Then, in September 1986, everything changed in the worst possible way. Cliff died in a terrible bus accident while the band was touring in Sweden. The other members of Metallica were completely heartbroken. They had lost not just their friend and bandmate, but also the person who many people believed was the most talented musician in the group. When they decided to continue as a band, instead of breaking up, they faced an impossible task. How do you replace someone irreplaceable? Jason Newsted was a talented bass player who had been performing with a band called Flotsam and Jetsam. When Metallica chose him to replace Cliff, everyone knew it would be difficult, but nobody could predict just how hard it would be for Jason to find his place in the band. From his very first day, Jason felt like an outsider looking in. The other members of Metallica, especially James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich, were still grieving the loss of their friend. Unfortunately, their grief often came out as cruelty toward Jason. They made it clear that he was just a replacement, not a true member of the family. They played mean pranks on him, excluded him from important band decisions, and constantly reminded him that he wasn't Cliff Burton. The worst example of how badly Jason was treated happened during the recording of their album And Justice for All in 1988. If you listen to that record today, you'll notice something strange. You can barely hear the bass guitar at all. That's because James and Lars deliberately mixed Jason's bass parts so quietly that they're almost impossible to hear. Imagine working incredibly hard on an album, pouring your heart into every song, only to have your contributions erased from the final product. That's exactly what happened to Jason. When fans and music journalists asked about why the bass was so quiet on the album, the band gave technical excuses. They talked about problems with the recording equipment and mixing decisions. But Jason knew the real reason. His bandmates were sending him a message. They were telling him that he wasn't important enough to be heard properly. Years later, Lars would admit that they were probably still mourning Cliff and took their emotions out on Jason unfairly. Despite all of this harsh treatment, Jason remained incredibly loyal to Metallica. He understood that he was living in the shadow of a legend, and he tried his best to earn his place in the band through hard work and dedication. For more than 10 years, he put up with being treated as a second-class member. He channeled all of his musical energy into Metallica and put his own creative dreams on hold. Jason was a talented songwriter and musician in his own right, but within Metallica, there was a very clear hierarchy. James Hetfield wrote most of the lyrics and came up with many of the song ideas. Lars Ulrich worked on the arrangements and had a strong voice in the creative process. Kirk Hammett contributed guitar solos and riffs. But Jason was expected to simply play what he was told to play and not offer too many of his own ideas. By the late 1990s, after more than a decade with the band, Jason was starting to feel creatively suffocated. Metallica had become one of the biggest rock bands in the world. They were selling millions of albums and playing to huge crowds everywhere they went. But all of that success came with a price. The band had become like a big business, with lots of rules and restrictions about what each member could and couldn't do. James Hetfield had always believed that Metallica should be like a family, and families stick together no matter what. In his mind, the band members should put all their energy and creativity into Metallica and nothing else. Any outside projects or interests were seen as distractions that could weaken the band. This family-first philosophy might have made sense in some ways, but also meant that Jason felt trapped and unable to explore his own musical ideas. That's when Jason started working on a side project that would eventually cause all the trouble. He began collaborating with two other musicians, guitarist Dylan Duncan and drummer Brian Sagrafana, on music that was very different from Metallica's heavy metal sound. Their songs were more melodic and progressive, with complex arrangements and thoughtful lyrics. Jason called this new band Echobrain. For Jason, Echobrain represented everything he couldn't express within Metallica. It was his chance to show the world that he was more than just a bass player who stood in the background. He was a creative artist with his own ideas and vision. The music he made with Echobrain was personal and meaningful to him in a way that his work with Metallica had never been allowed to be. At first, Jason's bandmates in Metallica didn't seem too concerned about Echobrain. They probably thought it was just a fun hobby that would keep Jason busy during breaks from touring and recording. Jason even invited James Hetfield to listen to some of Echobrain's songs, hoping to get his blessing for the project. He wasn't trying to hide anything or go behind anyone's back. He genuinely believed that his friends and bandmates would support his desire to explore different kinds of music. But as Echobrain started to gain attention from people in the music industry, attitudes within Metallica began to change dramatically. Record label executives were interested in signing Echobrain. Music journalists wanted to write about them. Suddenly, what seemed like an innocent side project was being viewed as a potential threat to Metallica's dominance. The situation became especially tense when someone at Elektra Records, which was Metallica's record label at the time, expressed serious interest in signing Echobrain. This triggered alarm bells for James and Lars, who had worked incredibly hard to build Metallica into a global phenomenon. They started to worry that Jason's attention was being divided between two different bands, and that Echobrain might somehow compete with or overshadow Metallica. Looking back, these fears probably seem unreasonable. Metallica was one of the biggest bands in the world, selling millions of albums and playing in stadiums. Echobrain was a small side project that most people had never heard of, but James and Lars weren't thinking logically. They were thinking emotionally, and their emotions told them that Jason was being disloyal. James Hetfield, in particular, felt betrayed by Jason's involvement with Echobrain. From James's perspective, Metallica wasn't just a job or even just a band. It was a brotherhood, a sacred bond between four musicians who had promised to put the group above everything else in their lives. When Jason started putting time and energy into another musical project, James saw it as breaking that sacred promise. The tension finally came to a head during a band meeting that included Metallica's management team. James Hetfield, backed up by Lars Ulrich and their managers, delivered an ultimatum to Jason that would change everything forever. The message was simple and brutal. Choose between Echobrain and Metallica. You can't have both. According to Jason, James told him directly that the management team agreed that Echobrain was damaging to Metallica's interests. They believed that Jason's side project was taking away from his commitment to band and creating confusion in the marketplace about what Metallica represented. James made it clear that if Jason continued with Echobrain, his time with Metallica would come to an end. For Jason, this ultimatum was devastating. After 15 years of loyal service to Metallica, after putting up with years of poor treatment and creative limitations, he was being told that he couldn't even have his own small creative outlet. It felt like the final insult, the last straw in a relationship that had been difficult from the very beginning. What made the situation even more painful was that Jason had hoped Metallica's management company would find a way for both projects to coexist peacefully. He thought they would be supportive of his artistic growth and find creative solutions that would benefit everyone involved. Instead, they sided completely with James and Lars, leaving Jason feeling isolated and betrayed. Jason later described the impossible choice he faced in interviews with music magazines. He explained that he had never intended for Echobrain to compete with or replace Metallica. He simply wanted the freedom to express different aspects of his musical personality, to explore sounds and styles that didn't fit within Metallica's framework. But his bandmates couldn't see it that way. To them, any creative energy that wasn't directed toward Metallica was energy that was being stolen from the band. From Lars Ulrich's perspective, the situation looked very different. As one of Metallica's founding members, Lars had invested his entire adult life in building the band from a small garage project into a global empire. Every decision he made was filtered through one simple question: is this good for Metallica? When he looked at Jason's involvement with Echobrain, the answer seemed obvious. It wasn't good for Metallica, so it had to stop. Lars later explained that he felt betrayed when he learned about the full extent of Jason's commitment to Echobrain. From his point of view, Jason was putting his heart and soul into another project while Metallica was still active and successful. This seemed to go against everything the band stood for. Metallica demanded total commitment from its members, and Jason's divided attention felt like a violation of that principle. It's important to understand that Lars wasn't necessarily being cruel or unreasonable from his own perspective. He genuinely believed that anything that took focus away from Metallica was harmful to the band's long-term success. He had seen other successful bands fall apart when members started pursuing solo projects or side bands. He was trying to protect something that he had spent decades building, even if his methods seemed harsh and controlling to Jason. But Jason couldn't accept the ultimatum. After years of feeling like a second-class member of the band, being told that he couldn't pursue his own creative interests felt like the final betrayal. In January 2001, he shocked the music world by announcing his departure from Metallica. The official statement talked about personal reasons and physical exhaustion, but people close to the situation knew that the real reason was a fight over Echobrain. Jason's departure sent Metallica into the darkest period in their history. The band was already dealing with internal problems, including James Hetfield's struggles with alcohol addiction. Losing their bass player on top of everything else nearly broke them apart completely. James soon entered rehabilitation for his drinking problem, and the band's next album, Saint Anger, became a painful and difficult process that was documented in a revealing film called Some Kind of Monster. During this terrible time, Lars was forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about how the band had treated Jason over the years. The therapy sessions that were filmed for Some Kind of Monster exposed many of the control issues and power struggles that had made Jason's position so difficult. Lars had to admit that there were serious problems with how creative decisions were made within the band and how much input different members were allowed to have. As the years went by, both Lars and James gained new perspective on the Echobrain situation and their treatment of Jason. While they never explicitly apologized for the ultimatum they had given him, they both acknowledged that they probably could have handled things differently. They admitted that their grief over Cliff Burton's death had affected their behavior toward Jason for many years, and that their need for control had perhaps gone too far. Meanwhile, Jason moved forward with his life and career. Echobrain released their debut album in 2002. While it didn't become a huge commercial success, Jason remained proud of the music he had created. He went on to play with other bands, including a stint with Voivod and performances with Ozzy Osbourne. He also started his own project called simply Newsted, continuing to explore the musical ideas that Metallica had never allowed him to express. In interviews years later, Jason made it clear that he had no regrets about leaving Metallica. He believed it was the right decision for everyone involved. He had found the creative freedom he had always wanted, and Metallica had eventually found stability with their new bass player, Robert Trujillo, who joined the band in 2003. Time helped heal some of the wounds between Jason and his former bandmates. When Metallica was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2009, Jason reunited with the band for the ceremony. He also performed with them during their 30th anniversary concerts. These moments of reconciliation showed that despite all the pain and conflict over Echobrain, there was still respect and history between these musicians that could never be completely erased. The story of the Echobrain Standoff raises important questions about creativity, loyalty, and control in successful bands. Was James Hetfield's ultimatum justified? Should a band be able to control what its members do in their spare time? Or should Jason have been allowed to pursue his artistic interests alongside his Metallica duties? There are valid arguments on both sides. From Metallica's perspective, they had built something incredibly valuable together, and they wanted to protect it from anything that might threaten its unity or focus. From Jason's perspective, he was a creative individual who deserved the freedom to express all aspects of his musical personality, not just the parts that fit within Metallica's narrow definition of what they should sound like. Perhaps the real tragedy is that both sides were partially right and partially wrong. Metallica's concerns about maintaining band unity were understandable, but their methods were harsh and controlling. Jason's desire for creative freedom was completely reasonable, but perhaps he could have found ways to pursue Echobrain that felt less threatening to his bandmates. The Echobrain Standoff ultimately changed all of the people involved. Jason learned that sometimes you have to choose between security and artistic freedom, and he chose freedom. Lars and James learned that excessive control can drive away talented people and damage relationships that took years to build. And Metallica as a band learned that they needed to become more open and flexible if they wanted to avoid similar conflicts in the future. This story serves as a reminder that even the most successful bands are made up of individual human beings with their own dreams, fears, and creative needs. When those individual needs come into conflict with the group's goals, the results can be painful for everyone involved. But it also shows that people can grow, learn from their mistakes, and eventually find ways to reconcile their differences. The next time you listen to Metallica's music, remember that behind all those powerful songs and incredible performances were real people struggling with real conflicts about loyalty, creativity, and control. The Echobrain Standoff was just one chapter in their long and complicated story, but it was a chapter that changed all of them forever. So, what do you think about this incredible story? Was Metallica right to give Jason an ultimatum, or should they have supported his creative freedom? Could this whole situation have been handled differently? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story as fascinating as we did, please hit that like button and share this video with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories about the secrets and scandals behind your favorite rock bands. We got plenty more shocking tales to tell, and you won't want to miss a single one.